Now, Connie said, come back to the present. Technically, when we're meditating, we actually are present. So if you want to go back, please feel free. Oftentimes, it's difficult. Our minds are trained to listen to talks as if they're narratives. We're not trained to listen to talks as if they're poetry. So there's going to be some poetry in today's talk, so don't try to get the words, just let the feeling flow if that's possible. But before we get serious, I have a question for you. Mary Jane, where do bad rainbows go? Why, they go to Prism. But it's a light sentence, so. Thanks, Connie, for that one. The children were lined up in a cafeteria of a Catholic elementary school for lunch. At the head of the table was a large pile of apples, and the nun made a note, posted it on the apple tray, "Take only one, God is watching." Moving further along the lunch line, at the other end of the table was a large pile of chocolate chip cookies. And the child had written a note, "Take all you want, God is watching the apples." That's how we get in trouble with food, isn't it, Esther? I also want to thank you, Esther, for your wonderful talk last week. Appreciate it. What a marvelous prism of spirit you are. Thank you very much. So my remarks today are entitled, "The Only Thing That Never Changes." The only thing that never changes, because as Connie noted in the introduction, here we are in the early days of fall. The nights are now longer than the days. The leaves are starting to change colors. The temperatures are indeed dropping noticeably more at night right now than at day, but in a couple of days it's going to cool off. We notice the produce in the farmers' markets is starting to change. And our summer flowers are fading, but the mums, the hollyhocks, the California poppies are blooming. We're getting out of the closets our jackets and sweaters. Pumpkins are showing up everywhere, and corn mazes are being set up. Halloween merchandise is already in the stores. Fall transitions us from the heat and torpor of summer to the cold and rain of winter. So this shift makes me contemplate transition. Now, it's true that things are always changing in our lives. Stasis is more an ideal than a practical reality, especially in our emotional and spiritual lives. Intellectually, we know this, but in spite of this, in our daily experience, we often resist change. We naturally habituate ourselves to believing that whatever is going on, good or bad, is going to be with us permanently. So naturally, if what's happening is bad, we do everything we can to change it back to good. And if what's happening is already good, we do everything we can to keep it that way. This is one of the great human paradoxes that challenge us in our relationship with God. Because change is a permanent feature of life. It's in divine order. And yet we resist change, especially that which we don't like, and often with a fury and a tenacity that is quite impressive. This in face of the fact that we know that the only thing that doesn't change is change itself. We know this, but we behave as if we don't believe it. Now, all things must pass away. This is the truth that never changes. In 1859, when he was finishing up a speech to the Wisconsin State Agricultural Society in Milwaukee, Abraham Lincoln noted this perpetual truth. He said, "It is said an Eastern monarch once charged his wise men to invent him a sentence to be ever in view and which should be true and appropriate in all times and circumstances. And so they presented him the words, 'And this too shall pass away.'" How much it expresses, Lincoln said, how chastening in the hour of pride, how consoling in the depths of affliction. And this too shall pass away. And he went on to say, and yet let us hope it is not quite true. Let us hope rather that by the best cultivation of the physical world, beneath and around us, and best cultivation of the intellectual and moral world within us, we shall secure an individual social and political prosperity and happiness whose course shall be onward and upward, and which, while the earth endures, shall not pass away. While the earth endures, Lincoln suggested that we have the power to secure an individual social and political prosperity and happiness whose course shall be onward and upward. Well, of course, we know now what Lincoln didn't know in 1859, that the very life of the earth itself is fated to come to an end. Cosmologists tell us that in 1 billion years or so, life as we know it will become untenable, and that in 7.5 billion years, the earth itself will be swallowed up by the dying sun. Now, 1 billion years means nothing to us humans, who have an average lifespan of 73 years. And still, when I was a kid, I certainly had no idea of being 70, as I now find myself. What seems a distant possibility soon enough becomes present reality. The role of time, when we reflect upon these two things, our individual lives and the life of the planet itself, is a complete mystery. Things change over time, and what that means for us also changes. But it changes unpredictably. Is time our friend or our enemy? It's just another mystery in the paradox of change. Now, underscoring this paradox, something that drives our natural resistance to change is fear. As we discussed here before, and as Connie mentioned in the meditation, fear is an elementary psychological dynamic of life in general and of human life in particular. All living things fear death, because death seems to be an extinction of life. Living things are designed to survive at all costs, even as at the same time we are all born with an expiration date. I know that one day I am going to die. Having turned 70, I am within 3 years of the lifespan of the average human being today. And even if I live as long as my parents, that means I have at best 20 years to go. Now, it used to be that contemplating this, even for a moment, brought on feelings of terror and helplessness. The thought of not being was something utterly unbearable. My father used to obsess about death. For years, he found the topic fascinating in its ability to horrify him. And yet, when the time came to actually pass away, his life slipped from his body in such a way that he was unaware of what was happening to him. His capacity to be aware of impending death disappeared long before he actually died. Somehow, the experience he dreaded for so long never materialized for him. Sam Cooke once sang, "A change is going to come." And for me, something has indeed changed in my contemplation of death. I'm not saying I want to die, but I am saying that I am willing to accept death as part of a much greater reality than my survival instincts can know. The German poet Rainer Maria Rilke wrote a poem that expresses what's shifted in my consciousness, a poem entitled Autumn. Now I'm reading an English translation, my friends. The leaves fall as from far, like distant gardens withered in the heavens. They fall with slow and lingering descent. And in the nights, the heavy earth too falls from out the stars into the solitude. Thus all doth fall. This hand of mine must fall, and lo, the other one. It is the law. But there is one who holds this falling infinitely softly in his hands. My friends, the mistake I and my father made for so long was to contemplate our lives as if they were utterly solitary and disconnected from the great evolutionary trajectory that is divine order. We focused on the fear and we overlooked the antidote, love. Now, we don't come from nowhere. We are not discrete, isolated, solitary individual beings. We are fractals of the one presence, one power, one love that is in fact the only thing going on in all of reality. If there is, as we affirm every Sunday, we did it today, just a half hour ago, that indeed there is only one presence, one power, one love, then I can only be somehow, in some way that my mind never grasps, an unalloyed version of that presence, power, and love. Remember what Eric Butterworth says about this in Practical Metaphysics? He writes, God is an allness of which I exist as an eachness. In other words, to use the term expression, I am an expression of God. The word express means to stand forth. I am the allness or activity of the love, the substance, and the life of God standing forth at this point, not in me, not working through me, not surrounding me, not putting his hands upon me, not guiding me, not directing me. Yes, all this, but something much more. Standing forth as me. Standing forth as me. Butterworth says, make a great mental note of that word, as. God expresses himself as me. Otherwise, we tend to go back into the anthropomorphic relationships of God guides me, directs me. God has his hands on my shoulder. God has the whole world in his hands and all of these things. God's eyes, God's ears, God's mouth, God's feet, all of these things, which you find in the anthropomorphisms expressed in the Old Testament of the Bible, we need to somehow transcend them and get the realization of God as an allness in which I exist as an eachness. The realization, the making real of God as an allness in which I exist as an eachness. Now, what does this mean? What should I expect when I affirm that I am an eachness of the allness of God? Now, answering this is tricky, because the information we are looking for is not an intellectual proposition. It's not a mental concept. As Eric Butterworth is trying to help us see, it's a realization. It's a conviction of truth embodied in my entire experience. It's letting Spirit, the divine, become the completeness of our experience right here, right now. And this cannot come by intellectual effort. The mind is the realm of distinctions and definitions, of separating experiences into conceptual boxes. It can never see unity. It can only do what it is designed to do. And so we must surrender any and all assumptions of mental precedence in the work of spiritual realization. And thus the road to knowing our experience in this and in any moment as only a divine experience is letting go of all thoughts of anything but God. Let go of everything personal, of everything that keeps us identifying our experience as individual, as isolated, as finite. Let go of all belief in anything limiting, and let the divine of ourselves flood our awareness of who we really are into our consciousness. The great Sufi poet Rumi brings us this sense of the pervasiveness of the divine in our daily lives in this poem entitled, A Necessary Autumn Inside Each of Us. You might want to close your eyes and let me recite this poem for us, because it's Rumi, so don't think about it. You and I have spoken all these words, he writes, but as for the way we have to go, words are no preparation. There is no getting ready other than grace. My faults have stayed hidden. One might call that a preparation. I have one small drop of knowing in my soul. Let it dissolve in your ocean. There are so many threats to it. Inside of us, inside each of us, there's a continual autumn. Our leaves fall and are blown out over the water. A crow sits in the blackened limbs and talks about what's gone. Then your generosity returns. Spring, moisture, intelligence, the scent of hyacinth and rose and cypress. Joseph is back. And if you don't feel in yourself the freshness of Joseph, be Jacob. Weep then and smile. Don't pretend to know something you haven't experienced. There's a necessary dying. And then Jesus is breathing again. Very little grows on jagged rock. Be ground. Be crumbled so wildflowers will come up where you are. You've been stony for too many years. Try something different. Surrender. Now, the only thing in the way of surrender is our thoughts, left over from our belief that we are separate people, unconnected from anything or anyone. Our thoughts that we have something to defend, to preserve, to keep from changing. These thoughts, normal and natural as they are, given their origin, are nonetheless the very essence of error consciousness. As Rumi says in his poem, these products of error consciousness are no preparation for experiencing the truth of our being, for knowing ourselves as always and only the expression of the one. But notice the subtle invitation when he says, my faults have stayed hidden. One might call that a preparation. Yes, for if I'm willing to know my thoughts of limitation and finiteness, my feelings of dread and fear, as also only expressions of the one, then maybe I can open myself to the experience of the divine in all things. There is nothing that is not God. There is nothing outside of God. This life of mine, this life of the planet Earth, this life of the universe are all just different flowers in the garden of the divine. Each may come and go, but they are all entirely creatures of the garden itself. And the garden always remains integrally itself, even as the seasons come and go. Each flower is created through the matter and energy found in the garden, and so is just a new version of the garden itself. And so too am I, and so too are you, just a unique version of the divine and nothing else. Eric Butterworth puts it this way. He writes, God is nowhere to be found, not a person, not a place, not even a being that can be related to in some distinct place in the universe by some special, unique process. God is presence. All presence. All present. Now here. The only way I can know God is to know that expression of God. The only way I can know God is to know myself and to find the depth of myself. Then I suddenly find myself at the point at which the allness of God is expressing itself or himself, or if you will, herself, at the point of me. The allness expressing as an eachness. We started today's reflection by noting how the coming of autumn occasions a reflection on the passage of things in time. All things must pass. Even each one of us, even the earth itself one day will cease to exist. And until I see God in each and every one of these entities, I will dwell in fear of death and decay, especially in fear of my own passing away. But these fears are born in the illusion that things in this world have their own independent existence and essence that must be preserved at all costs. Our fears are born in the erroneous belief that I am an entity requiring defense against change and dissolution. The fact that this defense cannot succeed should reveal something to us. Perhaps we are wasting our energy focusing on a fool's errand. I cannot prevent change. I cannot prevent death. But what I can do is surrender all my illusions of separation, illusions of limitation and deprivation, about life and death themselves, to the infinite, omnipresent, ever-loving God that only is. Now, I work daily to change my thoughts from belief in the necessity of my individuality to identification with the source, the actual source of my being. In her book, Effectual Prayer, Unity teacher Francis Folks writes, "All men travel the path from self to God by way of prayer. Little by little, one learns to relax the physical so that God life may enter, to let go the mental so that God thoughts may take possession, to shut out sight and sound, emotion and desire, and become still before God. No one can take these steps for another any more than he can eat for another or sleep for another. Each one must take them for himself at his own time in his own way. Through many experiences, he learns the way. Through forms and creeds, through prayers of many words, through desires and emotions, the soul finally finds itself in God." She says it may take months, years, ages to become a righteous man whose prayer availeth much. But time is nothing to the soul who has truly set out to find the kingdom. Once the soul becomes aware of the divine plan and his part completing it, the way is filled with victories, the path lighted by the angel presence going before to make plain the way. All trials and tribulations are swallowed up in victories, forgotten in the joy of the knowledge that comes through achievement. So, my friends, may we use this shift from summer into fall to remind us of what is truly only real. God alone is real, and I can know God by knowing myself. And the better I know myself, the more quickly I recognize thoughts of limitation and separation. And the more quickly I recognize these thoughts, the sooner I can replace them with affirmations of the truth. I separate myself in consciousness from the mind of the flesh, that I may enter into the mind that was in Christ Jesus. God and I are one. I have no identity except as the one expressing for however long as me. And while I'm expressing right here, right now, what I'm expressing right here, right now, is this particular version of the allness of God, the allness everywhere present. So what never changes? What never changes? In spite of our experience of change, passage of time, birth and death, growth and decay, what never changes? My friends, the answer to that question is in your experience right now. The presence of God is answering that question for you right now. And for this realization, this making real the truth of who we are, I am infinitely grateful. Thank you, God. Amen.